So a couple of days ago, Konami announced a brand new way to play the TCG. Yu-Gi-Oh! Genesis is a brand new format with a very, very big headline: no banned cards. Instead of having cards banned, you're allowed to play any card that's ever been printed in Yu-Gi-Oh!, with the exception of Links and Pendulums, except for the fact that they have a very long list of cards with a point cost associated to them. And effectively, you're allowed to build a deck with a total point cost of 100 points or less, meaning that if you choose to build a deck with a card that costs 100 points, none of the other cards that are featured on the points list are allowed to be played in your deck alongside it. Overall idea of this format is that it brings the power level of Yu-Gi-Oh! Down, and it brings the complexity level of Yu-Gi-Oh! Also down by removing pendulums and link monsters and forcing people to play with cards that are usually going to be less powerful than the typical suite of 3 of hand traps and all sorts of broken cards that you can just be playing in your modern standard format Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck. Now, I know that by the title of this video, you might think that I hate this concept. I hate the idea. I fucking hate Yu-Gi-Oh! Genesis. But that's not the case. I actually really like the concept of having to deck build with a point system in mind, because it lends itself to forcing the player to make very important concessions in terms of deck building, and ultimately forcing people to play with very unique deck lists and interesting deck lists. And overall, I think it's just a fantastic deck building challenge. I'm a big fan of deck building challenges. I think that anytime you're building with a restriction, it forces you to create something cool and unique and different, and I love that about the concept of Yu-Gi-Oh! Genesis. Now, actually, what I dislike about Yu-Gi-Oh! Genesis is the implementation of one very specific thing. So we're gonna get into it. Before that, I just gotta give you a little bit of context. Basically, they announced Yu-Gi-Oh! Genesis a couple of days ago, and then just yesterday, they already updated some of the point costs on a lot of the cards. Now, I know that a lot of people are happy about this, and they're like, oh my god, they're listening to community feedback, and they're responding very quickly, and they're actually communicating with us through blog posts, which is like unheard for Konami, and I think that's really good. However, I think that they jumped the gun just a little too quickly. I really don't think that 2 days worth of theory crafting really is enough to know whether or not certain cards were too broken, certain cards cost too little, certain cards cost too much. I think with YCS Anaheim around the corner, it's literally 2 weekends away, I think that that would have been enough time to give people to try to discover what all decks would be interesting to play in the format, and then taking it to the YCS Anaheim side event, where they're going to be running them all day on Saturday and on Sunday to win a freaking Dark End Dragon, which is crazy. And then I think with the results of that, you can basically take a little bit more of an educated guess based on, you know, statistics and actually what was played, as opposed to just take a wild guess from what people have been brewing in Discords for the last 2 days. So me personally, I did buy some cards because I had this really cool idea for a deck, and unfortunately, the deck that I wanted to build is no longer viable due to these new changes. Now, I'm going to clarify, I don't think this is one of those, I invested into these cards and I should have been allowed to get a return on my investment. That's not how I feel about it at all. Anyone who knows me knows that whenever I buy a card, I don't view it as an asset or as a stock or anything like that. However, I think that when you buy a card because you were presented with a format, you built a deck for it, bought the cards in order to be able to play it with your friends or at your locals, because a lot of locals are firing this event, I really think that you should be allowed to get value out of that card and get playtime out of that card is what I mean in terms of value. So the fact that they initially released this format and then 2 days later, after probably a lot of people purchased cards because they were excited to give this format a try, already killed off a lot of decks that a bunch of people were very excited to play, probably bought some cards to play, and now won't be able to use those cards for. So that's my first complaint. However, we are going to finally get into the larger complaint, and this is the meat and potatoes of the video. This is the main reason why I wanted to create this video, and it's because I have one really big complaint about this format that I've been looking online and I haven't seen anyone really talking about it. So I want to basically present this argument to you guys just as food for thought. Now, again, I like the concept of Yu-Gi-Oh! Genesis. This is not me being here to complain, being like, they killed the one deck that I theorized and wanted to play. It truly is just me presenting you with an alternative thought that you might not have had, just so that more people can maybe think about it and see maybe Yu-Gi-Oh! Genesis should be something just ever so slightly different. And the change that I'm suggesting is not a really crazy major one. So, the main complaint that I have about Yu-Gi-Oh! Genesis is the headline itself. No banned cards. Now, while I think the concept of no banned cards is A, interesting, and B, also is a headline that, let's face it, really attracts returning players, people that haven't played the game in over a decade, or even just new players. This idea of, wait, I can play with everything? That's so cool. I think that that's a concept that, in theory, lends itself well to inviting a lot of people to start playing this format. However, on the opposite side, 100-point cost cards are effectively just banned in this format. You look at cards like Utopic Zexal or Rongo Miniad, and these cards, despite the fact that Rongo doesn't actually cost 100, but a majority of these problematic cards are effectively just banned in this format. While yes, you are allowed to play it in your deck at the cost of effectively not being able to play anything else, the flip side of that is that they associated a high point cost, or a point cost that would get you above the 100-point threshold, in order to make it so that these cards are effectively just not playable anyway. So while this format does in fact not have a ban list, with the exception of Links and Pendulums, but for the remainder of this video, we're just gonna go with the assumption of there is no ban list, okay? While this format has no ban list, the reality of it is that there are a lot of cards that are pseudo-banned because they're not able to be played in any meaningful way. You can put them in your deck, but you're not able to use them in any way, shape, or form. So why do I have a problem with these 100-point costs even being allowed in the game at all? The reason why I have an issue with it is because every single one of these 100-point cost cards take a bunch of other cards with them and bloat up this point cost list. The major reason that I'm seeing people talking about why Links and Pendulums were banned is because people are saying that if Links and Pendulums were allowed, there would be way too many cards that would have to be put on this point list, and reducing how many cards are on this point list actually makes it a lot more digestible for newer and returning players to actually pick up this format. However, when you look at the 100 cost cards, those are also a big culprit towards this exact same factor. You look at, once again, Utopic Zexal. Every single rank up card ever created in the game has at least 1 point cost associated to it, specifically so that you can't play it with number S0 Utopic Zexal. And that just seems very strange to me. Now, I know this is going to sound extremely weird, but the big reason why I wanted to make this video, and I know you guys are going to say, Coder, you have a horse in the race. They hit your deck. They hit the thing that you wanted to do. Let me break this down. I got really upset because in the points update that they made, they took Planet Pathfinder, a card that has seen effectively no competitive play damn near ever in the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG, with the exception of being played in Mystic Mine, and they made it cost 3 points. Now, why did they do this? They did this because Mystic Mine is legal in this format. Mystic Mine being obviously a card that, if it hits the board and sticks, you outright win the game by stalling the game entirely to a halt and burning your opponent for game. So, because Mystic Mine is legal, every single field spell searcher has a point cost associated to it. Terraforming, Planet Pathfinder, Metaverse, heck, Demise of the Land. These cards that effectively don't see any play unless they're played in some very specific strategies that can utilize them in interesting ways, with the exception of Mystic Mine, which uses it for evil, essentially. I remember the days of the TCG banning every single tuner instead of just banning Crystron Halqifibrax, and I remember when they would hit every single FTK enabler instead of just banning OG Firewall Dragon. This is not something that we want to be repeating, yet this is what we're seeing here. Now, Coder, why is Planet Pathfinder something that's even on your radar? Why do you even care? I was basically playing a K9 Archmage deck. Now, I know that they hit Jokal, and I think that's a very reasonable hit to make. And I think the deck would still be extremely playable despite that point cost. However, one thing that is kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back is the point cost associated to Planet Pathfinder. In my opinion, being able to stick 2 5s on the board to go into a River Stormer to get Planet Pathfinder in order to search out a field spell that gets you to Engine is, in my opinion, a very creative thing that you can do deck building wise. Having this ability of combining level 5s from one archetype in order to go into another archetype's rank 5 monster to search a generic card that gets you to the field spell that gets you to your deck's engine is a very, very cool thing that you should be allowed to do, especially in a low-powered format like this. Being able to have this one consistency card that bridges two unique engines together is really cool in my opinion. So while I understand the appeal of wanting to have these 100 cost cards that you basically can build around one really OP boss monster or some broken degenerate card like Mystic Mine, my big issue is that this gimmick of wanting to have every single card legal comes at the cost of bloating the list of cards with a point cost associated to them, while also associating a point cost to cards that, let's face it, shouldn't have one in the first place. A lot of these rank up cards are totally fine and should be allowed to be played for free. Planet Pathfinder is also a card that should totally be allowed to be played for free. I don't think that any of these cards should have a point cost associated to them. So like I said in the beginning of the video, I really do like the concept of having a point cost associated to cards, but I think that the implementation of this kind of falls flat for me. And the reason why I say this is because I like the point cost distribution because it offered a different way to implement a ban list into the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game. A lot of times you'll hear people talking about, what if we had a Duel Links ban list where if a card is at 2, you can play 2 of it or 1 of it and another card that's at 2 or something like that, which was a ban list idea that never would really work for the TCG. But then a lot of people had this idea of, what if a card was too broken in tandem with this one other card, what if you just made it so that you can't play both cards together? Realistically, in my opinion, that is what Yu-Gi-Oh! Genesis was attempting to create. It was attempting to create a list where you are able to make concessions in terms of like generic good cards that you can play in favor of being able to play some of these 2-card combos that are very powerful together and sometimes a little too powerful. The way I look at it in my head is that something like Fire Formation Tenki, a card that's really good for searching out Beast Warrior monsters. In my opinion, I think that Ancient Warriors is a deck that is probably weak enough that allowing them to play Tenki is probably extremely reasonable. As opposed to the Zodiac deck, which is a lot more powerful, that deck already has Zodiac Barrage to have consistency, so why not associate a point cost to the Fire Formation Tenki and the Zodiac Barrage to make it so that the Zodiac player has to decide, well, Barrage is the engine card, I'm going to choose to pick Barrage, and instead of playing Tenki, I'm going to take these points that I would attribute towards an additional consistency card and instead put them towards, you know, some more generic powerful cards like a Joel and Lockbird or some Ash Blossoms or something like that. I think that the idea of the point cost was absolutely a fantastic idea to make it so that different 2-card combos or 3-card combos that were too powerful together can be given an associated point cost that makes it so that you're not really able to play all of them. However, if one of those cards is fair to play in one deck or one of those cards is fair to play in another deck, those decks are able to reasonably play these cards without making too much of a concession in their deck building. So Coder, after all this rambling, what exactly is your solution? We understand that the complaint is that I dislike the 100 cost cards because it makes it so that a bunch of other cards that are interesting to deck build with are given some sort of arbitrary point association. Rank ups costing 1, Planet Pathfinder costing 3 for some reason instead of 1. They could have just made it cost 1, but for some reason it costs 3. And it feels like it's kind of all willy-nilly. My suggestion is the following. I think that you can keep this concept of there is no ban list, there are no banned cards, while also removing some cards from being able to play it in the most popular or standard format of Yu-Gi-Oh! Genesis. I think that a lot of these 100 point cost cards that are deemed to be so powerful that you should only be allowed to play one of them in your deck without combining it with any of these like 500 other cards that are on the list should actually be bumped up by 1 point. I think that all of these 100 cost cards that are really broken, like Mystic Mine, like VFD, they should all cost 101 points. Now, why is this my suggestion? Let's face it, a card like Mystic Mine that costs 100, but every other card that makes Mystic Mine good, costing some points, is effectively a ban on Mystic Mine. Sure, you can play the 1 copy of Mystic Mine, but with none of these other cards, your Mystic Mine deck is not going to be able to function. So for that reason, playing Mystic Mine becomes unviable, and for that reason, it's effectively a ban on Mystic Mine. So my suggestion is to, instead of making it cost 100 so you can still play it in the standard format, but you can't play any of the other stuff, you instead make it so cards like Mystic Mine, like VFD, all cost 101 points so that they're rotated out, phased out effectively from the standard format of Yu-Gi-Oh! Genesis. However, they're still completely legal viable and playable in any tournament that decides to run an over 100 point cost tournament. What this creates is the following points. The first reason I think that this would be a really solid change for the format is it would allow the team to build the point cost list around the concept that these 101 cost cards are not able to be played in the standard format, meaning that a lot of these rank up magic spells would probably be able to not be on the list at all. You can remove those entirely. Cards like Metaverse, cards like Demise of the Land, cards like Planet Pathfinder, you can remove those cards from the list entirely because they can't be played in tandem with Mystic Mine in the standard format of 100 points. The second reason why I think this would be a very good change is because it doesn't outright ban these cards entirely. Local tournaments are allowed to choose to run tournaments with a higher or lower point cost for their events, meaning that you can get some events where you can't play any of the cards that are on the point list, basically a 0 point cost tournament. You can get a 50 point cost tournament to bring the power level down just a little bit, but you can also do the opposite and run a 200, 300, 500 point cost tournament in which cards like Mystic Mine alongside these, Mystic Mine Searchers and stuff like that would still be able to be played. So while you, yes, phase out some cards from the standard format, you do still adhere to the headline of no ban list, because truly you aren't banning any of these cards. You're just saying that these cards have a specific point total associated to them, and depending on the tournament that you're playing in, you might be able to have enough points to play it, or you might not be able to have enough points to play it, while ultimately not telling people, hey, these cards will never be able to be played ever again, such as Mystic Mine in the TCG, for example. And ultimately, I really think that if we implemented these changes and allowed some of these cards to be set to a point total that is above 100, it would basically make it so we get a lot less of these collateral damage hits on the list, and we can instead focus on creating a list that makes it so that you just can't play pairs of cards that are just okay, but when put together do too much, and instead allow people to play with these cards that are just okay in decks where they're just okay, where they're completely fine to be played. Instead of just creating a format where we're able to just remove the problematic cards, the way too powerful cards, and making it so you can only play them in a tournament that is basically meant to be high power and overpowered, where everyone's playing with broken shit, we can instead remove these cards, allow the standard format of the formats to be played in a way where all the cards that are on the list have a realistic chance of being played, while also making it so these lower power decks can utilize some of these really interesting cards in their deck building to create not only an interesting deck, but interesting play lines and interesting games ultimately. If you remove a lot of these crazy power cards and you let a lot of people play with some interesting stuff, you get longer games, you get more interesting games, you get more diverse games. I think that this whole concept, this whole idea would actually allow decks to be more diverse rather than forcing everyone to be playing 3 copies of Iron Thunder because that's the only good counter trap that costs 0. You know what I'm saying? So ultimately, I want to know what you guys think. Do you guys feel like Yu-Gi-Oh! Genesis is in a place that you like? Do you guys think that the idea of having cards like Mystic Mine, cards like VFD in the format allowed in tandem with other cards that, would be able to be played with them, having a point cost associated to it, making it harder for other decks to be able to implement those cards, is fine? Or do you guys feel as though having the opportunity to put some of these cards to 101 and balancing the list a lot more around the cards that people are actually wanting to be playing would be a better solution moving forward? I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. If you disagree with me, that is completely fine. I want it to be very clear. This is simply my opinion, and my opinion is not gold. Maybe I'm in the wrong here, and that's okay. I want to spark good, healthy discussion around this topic because, like I said, I really like the concept of this format, and I really think that there's just a couple of flaws that need to be, like a couple of kinks that need to be ironed out. But I think that if those flaws get addressed and get ironed out, I think that this format can genuinely be something really beautiful and a really, really, really cool direction for Yu-Gi-Oh! To be taking. So please leave your comments in the comment section below. I'm going to be reading through those. Heck, maybe I'll even argue with you guys. I've already been arguing in the Genesis Discord. I'll link that in the description as well if you guys want to join. It's not official by any means, but it is a big Discord where everyone is playing Genesis format. It's super cool. A lot of nice people there. A lot of people there that are open to having open discussions about stuff like this. And I'm really hoping that we can spark some healthy debate, healthy discussion around this topic. because I feel very strongly about this. I really think that this is the one big change that would truly make this format something fantastic that a lot of people would be looking forward to playing. So with that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching. Thanks so much for hearing me ramble for however long I've been talking, and I appreciate you all, and I'll see you all in the next video. Have a good one, guys. Peace.